Alright, so let's take a closer look at the compulsory aspect question number 2 in the just ended core mathematics WASSCE. So the second question was like, a stockbroker Kojo invested some amount into accounts which pay 11% and 10% simple interest annually. The amount invested at 11% is 140% of the amount invested at 10%. Now, after 3.5 years, he earned a total of 22,580 Ghana cedis, 60 pesos, as interest. How much was invested at 11%? Now, how do we solve this question? This is a simple interest question. So now let's see what the question demands. Now, first of all, we don't know the amount that was invested. That's the principal. In terms of simple interest, the amount you invest is called the principal. All right. So now, since we don't know the amount that was invested at 10%, we can say let the amount invested at 10% be P, since P represents principal, and the amount invested at 11% be 140% of the amount invested at 10%. So if you look at it carefully, realize that we are told a stockbroker Kojo invested some amount into accounts which pay 11% and 10% simple interest annually. Now, the amount invested at 11% is 140% of the amount invested at 10%. So that's the mathematical equation for that statement. So the amount invested at 11% is going to be 140% times the amount invested at what? 10%, which was represented as P. So if you simplify further, 140% is just 1.4. So sorry, instead of initially I used A, so let me change it to P. Let me change this one to P. Okay. Initially I used A as the amount, but I realized that in simple interest, we normally use E for the amount, and to get the amount is normally the principal plus the interest. So the amount you invested is just the principal. So let's use P instead of A. So now, our simple interest is just the principal times rate times time. Our principal times rate times time. Okay, so now the simple interest earned at 10%. So let's calculate the simple interest earned at 10%. So since we know the formula, so still I didn't change this side. Let me change this one to P. Okay. Initially I used E, that's why. So our P, which is the principal, times 10%. So the 10% here is the rate times the time, which is 3.5 years. All right. So 10%. So if you simplify further, 10% is just 0.1, and 3.5 is just 7/2, because 3.5 is actually a mixed fraction. So we convert it into an improper fraction. It has 7/2. If you simplify further, you get 0.35p. So the simple interest earned at 10% in terms of expression is 0.35%. Now, we also need to calculate the simple interest earned at 11%. And we are told the amount invested was what? 1.4p. So that's 140% of the amount invested at 10%. So it's going to be 1.4p times the rate, which is what? 11%. So 11/100 times 7 at the same time, 7/2. So if you solve it, or if you use your calculator to simplify, you get 0.539p. All right. So our total interest in the question was 22,560 Ghana cedis, 580 Ghana cedis, 60 pesos. Now, so we need to add, so those two interests that we got at 10% and 11%, we need to add those two interests and equate it to the total interest, which was 22,580 Ghana cedis, 60 pesos. So when you do that, you come out, when you add the 0.35p to 0.539p, you're going to get 0.889p. It's equal to 22,580 Ghana Cedi 60 pesos. So now if I make p the subject, I divide both sides of the equation by 0.889. So this 0.889 cancel this 0.889. Our p now becomes 25,400 Ghana cedis. So that is the amount invested by Kojo. That's 25,400 Ghana cedis is the amount invested by Kojo at 10%. Now the question didn't ask us to find for the amount invested at 10%, but rather the amount invested at 11%. So now the amount invested at 11% was 1.4 times the amount. That's 140% the amount invested at 10%. So you just multiply the 1.4 by the amount could you invested at 10%, which you got as 25,400 Ghana cedis. Now when you use your calculator, you're going to get 35,560 Ghana cedis to be the amount invested at 11%. So therefore, Kojo invested an amount of 35,000 Ghana cedis, 560. Therefore, Kojo invested an amount of 35,560 Ghana cedis at 11%. So this is all what the question demands you to do. Very, very easy. Thank you.